Good morning, one and all. How are we doing this morning?
Great, thank you.
Yes, good.
That's good. This is a day that the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Indeed, it is a privilege of mine, the research officer at Sam Shar Teachers College, to welcome everyone to this TCJ online webinar. We are in for a treat with so much unpacked information coming from the experts, those who are going to be feeding us with information from a qualitative or quantitative perspective. And as we prepare ourselves for these sessions, let us be mindful that although these are the times when many of us are quite busy, some persons might be in 2 meetings as we speak. There might be persons who are fatigued, having papers to mark and all these things. But rest assured that this session will enlighten you so that you'll be better able to become good researchers. And as we try to monitor and manage our time, we will ask the Lord to help us in doing so well. At this point in time, I'm going to ask us to close our eyes as we ask the Holy Spirit to dwell among us as we seek to be enlightened as educators. Let us pray. It is a good thing to give thanks unto the Lord and to sing praises unto thy name, O Most High. Father, we tell you thanks for having allowed us this wonderful opportunity to be alive. We're so grateful to you for enabling us as educators to meet together in this platform, to be educated and to become more resourceful in being researchers who are on the verge of becoming more. And Lord, as we are here to learn from each other, we're asking you to help us to do so in an orderly fashion. We pray for our presenters. We pray that they will execute well. Give them wisdom. Help them, Lord, to be able to disseminate the information which is needed for us to elevate as we continue to do research, which is needful for solving problems in our field. Lord, we are so thankful to you for all your many blessings towards us. We thank you for all the planners and all the stakeholders behind this TCJ mission and our education at large. Lord, we thank you for your goodness towards us. And if it had not been for you, Lord Jesus, where would we be? And so in light of this, we give you honor and we give you glory. And we ask you to go forth today to help us to continue to be change agents wherever we go. In Jesus' name's sake we pray. Amen.
Good morning, all. My name is Jolette. Good morning. My name is Jolette Russell. I am the research officer at GC Foster College of Physical Education and Sport. Now, on behalf of the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica Council and the TCJ Research Board, manned by 8 excellent, formidable research officers from across the 8 colleges of TCJ, I am extremely delighted to welcome you to our first research webinar. We are thrilled to have you join us as we explore innovative approaches to research methodology and its significance in promoting sustainable practices in educational research. Now, this event featured very esteemed speakers who you will be introduced to in short order. They will share valuable insights on evidence-based research methodologies. Now, our other goal is to provide vital professional development for you, our esteemed colleagues across TCJ. We encourage you to participate actively in this session. Please ask questions. And more importantly, we invite you, as you will be instructed later, to do our pre and post evaluation of this, our first webinar. Your participation is key to the success of this webinar. If you have colleagues that have not joined, please send a quick text to them to remind them that this is an opportunity that they should not miss. Your participation is key. We know, as Kerry have said, that you are busy people, but you find the time to be here this morning, and that's a very good sign. Again, we thank you for your participation, and we hope that it inspires you to explore research and go even further to extend your publication output. Thank you again, and have a very, very wonderful webinar. Now, before I even go, I want to introduce our key planners for this event. Of course, it's a TCJ board event, but at the forefront is Dr. Khadijah Williams, and from the Mooney College, and Miss Diane Griffith, who is the chair of professional development, and Diane Hales from Bethlehem Moravian College. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, and same to you.
A pleasant good morning to everyone. This morning we have three presenters. The first, Dr. Julian Hasford, Associate Professor and Graduate Program Director, Toronto Metropolitan University. And then we will have Dr. Johnson and later on, Dr. Williams. I would like to introduce to you Dr. Julian Hasford. Dr. Julian Hasford is an associate professor in child and youth care at Toronto Metropolitan University with expertise in community-based research and the intersections of race, identity, and mental health in urban settings. Julian's scholarly work critically examines systemic racism, social justice, and the role of culturally responsive care in supporting the well-being of Black youth and families. His research is rooted in community engagement and seeks to address the unique challenges faced by Black diasporic communities in urban environments, particularly in relation to Black agrarianism, food sovereignty activism, and cultural resilience. Julian's work is dedicated to advancing the field of child and youth care through the integration of anti-racist and decolonial practices. Dr. Hasford is keenly interested in non-traditional research methodologies, promoting colonial scholarship and practice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Julian Hasford. Over to you, Dr. Hasford.
Before you go, Dr. Ashford will do the pre-evaluation for about 5 minutes. So we'll give the time to do that, and then you will go ahead and present. So the moderator, go ahead and distribute the pre-evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Participants, the link for the pre-evaluation is posted in the chat, so spend a few minutes to do that. Over to you now, Dr. Asford.
Thank you. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Williams, again for the invitation to share some words with you this morning. And thank you, Ms. McFarlane, for the introduction. So again, my name is Dr. Julian Hasford. I'm Associate Professor in the School of Child and Youth Care at Toronto Metropolitan University in Toronto, Canada. And for the next few minutes, I just want to take some time to share a bit about some experiences we've had looking at and using research to support some of the work we've done in the university, as well as just some broader reflections about the importance of data and evidence with respect to higher education. If you bear with me one moment, I will project my slides. Okay, excellent. So I realized as I was preparing my comments that I may have been a bit overambitious. So I will try to move fairly quickly without rushing, but will appreciate your patience. And just want to apologize in advance. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay for the full duration of this morning, but I am looking forward to hearing some of the conversation, other presentations during the earlier part. So I think we all know quite well, and especially given the topic of concern today, that we do face higher education in particular, but multiple systems in our societies faced many emergingly and increasingly complex challenges. Pardon me. And many of the most pressing challenges have gotten complex because of some of the impact of the pandemic. And sometimes some folks will say the pandemic never really ended, right? We are continuing to feel the impacts of the COVID-19 virus across the globe. And what that looks like in terms of unresolved grief and loss, in terms of economic instability, increasing evidence about the long-term health and neurological impacts of the virus itself on the human brain, and how that is manifesting and showing up in different ways, including issues of instability, violence, and many other types of challenges. We are also continuing to face economic austerity and neoliberal ideologies, which are driving policy decision-making, again, across the globe. And how decision-making is driven by an ideology that privileges markets over human welfare, and that is constantly posing a threat to ongoing and sustainable funding for higher education and social services. Our institutions are also facing declining enrollment. There have been significant declines in enrollment across North America and across the globe, and many of these issues intersect, right? As we see a widening gap between the rich and the poor, as the cost of education continues to increase, as the cost of living continues to increase, people have to make more difficult challenges about whether or not higher education is a viable option for them. And so we are observing the impacts within higher education, and even in our secondary institutions as well. And then, of course, there's the challenges around the increasingly significant role of technology, right, in society, not only in terms of online, learning opportunities, which presents both an opportunity as well as a challenge, but the increasing potential of AI, right, and what that means in terms of how students learn and how they demonstrate their learning, social media, how that impacts how students are able to absorb information, and to respond to how our education system is currently structured. And in spite of these changes, which have been unfolding for decades, our core model of education, of higher education, has remained relatively stable. And I don't want to overstate the point. I know that there's a lot of innovations and creativity that happens within classrooms and institutions everywhere. But to a large degree, the core logic and the principles that drive our teaching and learning have remained fairly similar. Many of us, and myself included, often rely on lectures, readings, assignments, tests, and grades as the foundations of our pedagogy. There tends to be an emphasis on theory and academic abstract knowledge over skills within higher education, especially universities. The emphasis on theory tends to be privileged during the earlier phases of a student's learning, and then hands-on skills tends to be emphasized during the latter part. But there is evidence that there's actually there are benefits to introducing applied learning earlier on in a student's career. And in general, student motivation, because of how we structure the system, student motivation is often driven by grades and credentials over actual learning. And so when I think about the costs and the challenges of the status quo for doing nothing across multiple types of service systems, it often reminds me of a story called, which was based on an article written by Malcolm Gladwell, who you see here, quite renowned African-Canadian author here in the bottom right corner. And he wrote an article called $1 Million Murray. And this is not directly related to education, but I think it raises some questions which really have some resonance. And so it's about Murray, who is a homeless man in Nevada, in the US, who was experiencing chronic homelessness. So he'd been homeless for several years. He had substance challenges, particularly with respect to alcohol, and was well known to police and other folks in the community. So he would be disruptive in the streets sometimes. He would drink to a point where he might pass out. And so he would be and get into conflicts and so forth on the streets. So Murray would be in and out of the jail systems, in and out of emergency rooms, in and out of psychiatric types of services. And some of the service providers, and particularly two police officers, decided to ask the question about what is it really costing us to serve Murray, across these multiple systems for so long. And they did an analysis looking at the number of his admissions and so on, and found that over a course of 10 years, Murray had cost the system about $1 million over a 10-year period, $1 million US for the inaction and maintaining services using the status quo approach within his city. And it's quite baffling when we think about the hidden costs of perpetuating and maintaining the marginalization of folks who are facing the most significant challenges in our society, because the common narrative is that they're actually drains and that it's not actually worth the resources to serve them. But growing analyses and recognition of the costs of inaction within the homelessness sector actually inspired a movement of a new way to think about how we serve homeless people, using an approach that provided unconditional, permanent supportive housing for folks who are most severely impacted by homelessness. And what they found, and I was involved in a randomized control trial, a research project in Canada, which looked at a trial of this, what they call housing first intervention, and found that for folks who are most seriously impacted, providing supportive housing actually resulted in a 25% savings to the federal and the provincial governments by shifting our thinking about the status quo and what we take for granted. And, the question might emerge in terms of what does this mean for education, of course. And there was a recent study released earlier this year, which estimated that globally, the cost of the status quo and inaction in our education systems is that it is costing us about $10 trillion a year in our inability to meet the needs of young people across our multiple levels of education. And some of those estimates could amount to as much as 58% of GDP of certain countries who were involved in the study. In terms of the implications for decreased work productivity, in terms of the lack of soft skills and the utilization of social services of folks who are not able to take full advantage of our education services. And so I shared those examples just to underscore the importance and the value of paying attention to data and to research and to thinking more critically about whether or not what we're doing is working. And so to underscore the point, I just want to highlight a few of the key benefits of data-based decision-making in higher education, including the fact that it improves accountability, right? So data provides opportunity for measurable evidence for evaluating our programs and policies, right? And being able to demonstrate to communities, to societies, to governments and whomever, to funders, that what we're doing is working. It enables more responsive education and targeted interventions. So, for example, there's been some research which has shown that there was a meta-analysis, so a review of some of the most rigorous studies that have compared active learning versus lecture-based, active teaching versus lecture-based teaching in universities. And what they found is that using active teaching methods can reduce student failure rates by as much as 33% on average, and increases academic achievement in terms of grades by about half a letter grade for most students. And so, again, paying attention to how the impacts of our current pedagogy can help us to re-examine our ways of doing the work and tailor our approaches accordingly. Data can also support resource optimization. So it helps us to prioritize, what we fund, how we allocate those increasingly rare resources within our institutions. For example, the University of Georgia has been quite well known for using predictive analytics to track its student performance and to identify students who are at risk of failure or dropping out. And so over years, by tracking student grades, by tracking attendance and various financial aid records, they were able to identify students earlier on in their academic trajectories, students who were at risk of failure and dropping out. And what they would do is, after identifying those students, implement appropriate types of supports and peer supports, which significantly reduced the rates of failure and dropout. And it has had particularly impactful implications for students from underserved communities and marginalized backgrounds. And then further, at an individual or practitioner level, being more sensitive and intentional about data-informed decision-making can help us cultivate a deeper practice of critical reflexivity, which is based on more systematic observation and with engagement with scholarly literature. Conventionally and historically, much of the emphasis and much greater value has been placed on quantitative research as a source of valid data and evidence-based decision-making. But what I want to highlight here briefly is an example of qualitative methods and how they can also be truly impactful to inform evidence-based decision-making. So just briefly, and I'm sure many folks are familiar, but I will reiterate that when I'm talking about qualitative methods, I'm talking about research that is based on non-numerical data, and that can take multiple forms, including interviews or focus groups, right, with various populations, observations or ethnography, right? So taking notes and observing what happens within a particular context itself can generate a form of insight and data. Archival or document-based research, arts-based research, there's a growing movement that recognizes the value of using activities such as poetry, photography, or videography, and other forms of artistic expression as a way in which to engage people in learning as a source of data to understand life and its complexities. And then participatory action research, which is a form of research through which the actual process of inquiry engages communities and folks who are perhaps involved in implementing or as users of a particular service are involved in the knowledge production process. And so the data that is generated through that process actually informs action, right? And informs the intervention in and of itself, which can be a really powerful and transformative approach to research, which I've applied in various areas of my work, including within higher education. So to highlight, I mean, some of the benefits of qualitative research includes that it can capture the lived experiences and voices that is often missed in quantitative data. So we might observe that there is declining enrollment or issues of attendance within a classroom, and we can make certain speculations, based on numerical data that we collect or perhaps geographic information that we have about the students. But we really won't understand what is driving student absenteeism until we understand what is going on in students' lives, right? What are some of the subtleties within the homes, the communities, their peer networks, in spaces where we don't have access to data, right? It's through those qualitative stories and the narratives that we can collect from folks that will give us insight into those complexities. It offers deep insights into cultural, social, and systemic contexts and challenges. So again, the service we deliver, right, our school system, our education systems are open, right? They interact with various other aspects of society. And it's very difficult to narrow down and to reduce that complexity into a survey or a series of numbers, right? And it's through observation and engaging people who are affected by systems in these kinds of processes. It amplifies the voices of underserved communities. So research often privileges folks who are connected with larger institutions. And much of the data we have is based on often a somewhat narrow subset and not necessarily a representative sample of those who tend to be on the margins of how institutions functions and who we speak to and who we collect information from. And so using qualitative methods can be a strategy for amplifying the voices of those folks who have often been marginalized. And then finally, it's also potentially, and this is variable, it really depends on how we design a study and so on, but it can be more cost-effective than quantitative research to conduct qualitative studies because this kind of work does not necessarily require large sample sizes. It can be done often in partnership with community groups. It can be embedded within various types of existing programs and services. And so we can be innovative in terms of how we can conduct qualitative research in a cost-effective manner. So the example I want to share briefly is with respect to a project we did in our School of Child and Youth Care in Toronto. And so, as folks will probably know, just given the fairly recent movement for Black lives, there are significant issues of anti-Black racism across the globe, including in North America and Canada. And that manifests through various inequities that we see with young people's experiences with respect to our education system, mental health, justice, and so on. This chart here is data from Toronto in about 2015, which looked at rates of suspension of Black students in comparison to other racialized or white students. And this has been relatively stable for decades, this disparity where we're seeing over twice the degree of suspensions faced by Black students in comparison to other groups. Now in Canada, we have a field called Child and Youth Care. And again, that's the discipline that I teach in, which is, it is a profession which specializes in supporting young people with complex needs. So child and youth care practitioners, they will work within schools, within hospitals, community contexts, and other settings, but have specialized skills for building intensive relationships with young people who face difficulties, and using innovative counseling techniques and strategies for advocacy to support those youth in meeting their needs. The challenge, however, is that over the years, child and youth care education and practice has been historically very Eurocentric and actually complicit with anti-Black racism. So child and youth workers have been known to support the targeting and discipline of Black students. Within residential care, there's a lot of data which shows that they disproportionately use force, right, and restraints and so forth with Black young people. And the field itself is currently going through a bit of transition and a recognition of that history, but there's still a lot of work to do. Within our own school and TMU, Black students and staff have themselves expressed concerns about anti-Black racism. Anecdotally, this has been a conversation that many of our colleagues have been having and that the students have been confronting as well. And so what we did to deal with this issue, or to respond to this issue, was we launched a participatory action research project, which used mixed methods. So it was actually both qualitative and quantitative research. And it was a partnership between the university and an organization called the Child and Youth Care Alliance for Racial Equity, which was a multi-ethnic collective of many of our alumni from our program, but other child and youth care practitioners. And they were able to secure a grant through a foundation, a charitable foundation in Ontario, which was a sizable grant, to look at pre-service learning and training of child and youth care practitioners. And it occurred around the same time that we as a school of child and youth care faculty were beginning to think about and ask questions about how we can respond more effectively to anti-Black racism. And we decided that a shift in curriculum would be one of the lower hanging fruits and kind of a good leverage point for restructuring and being more critical and promoting racial equity in terms of how we train our students. And so the goal of the project, one of the major goals, was to develop an evidence-informed strategy for curriculum reform and professional development. So the methods we used, again, it was a participatory action research project. So we had an advisory committee that included representatives of students, of young people, of faculty and practitioners who were Black, and they helped us think about how to design the project and engage people. But the actual data collection itself included processes of course mapping. We conducted surveys with instructors and students, focus groups as well with instructors and students. And that culminated in an action through which we redeveloped a subset of our undergraduate courses, right, 5 of them, in order to really recenter learnings about anti-Black racism. And not just anti-Black racism, because through the surveys and the focus groups and our dialogues, we realized that there is a real need and desire for embedding Afrocentric ways of knowing and moving away from deficit-oriented ways of thinking about Blackness and racism, right? And highlighting some of the strengths of Black culture as well. And so we redeveloped those 5 courses and did a pilot project to implement those redeveloped courses, but also realized that in order to implement systemic change, or in order to implement any significant educational innovation, there has to be support for the quality of implementation. And so along with the course redevelopment and piloting, we also developed a community of practice for the instructors who were teaching those piloted courses. And through that process, some of the things that we learned and some of the impacts was a deeper understanding of the lived experiences of Black students. Was, as I said, learning that there was a need for, or an interest, deep interest in moving beyond a focus on race as we think about and talk about anti-Black racism, but also to look at Black excellence and Afrocentricity, recognizing that there's a diversity of experiences of racism, and that for many of our Black students, they didn't necessarily experience direct racism, although they were still concerned about issues of representation. and which also reflected to some extent their understanding and sensitivity to how race functions. We gained insight into some of the instructors' strengths and challenges in teaching about anti-Black racism, right? Different divergences in terms of how they understand race and racism. Anxieties that some folks had in terms of what the implications are around their job security, particularly for our part-time staff, who felt that if they weren't able to demonstrate competence, or if they didn't participate in some of these equity-focused initiatives, what the implications might be for their own job security. And that affected their ability to actually engage in an authentic way within these processes. Through the work, we also were able to create spaces to mobilize knowledge and network with other child and youth care communities. So this image that you see here is of one of our partners at a knowledge exchange event where we had over 100 folks from different sectors who are connected to child and youth care come together, where we shared some of what we had learned, but also started to do some brainstorming about how we can create bridges with early childhood education, with midwifery, with folks across different types of disciplines to think about building more responsive systems of care for young people in general. It helped us create bridges between our full-time faculty and our part-time instructors, right, by creating these spaces for dialogue, as well as a framework for future course development and professional development as well. So I just want to end with highlighting, because I know, part of the concern with research can often be, how do we do it? And especially as somebody said during the opening, many of us are thinking about marking and other types of more proximate priorities and don't necessarily have the resources to do this work. So I just wanted to share some parting reflections and ideas in terms of my own experience in terms of how we can resource and support this. One area, of course, is through government grants. I'm not sure what the funding landscape looks like within Jamaica, but there are certainly opportunities through partnering with organizations in other countries to secure resources to potentially fund research. So for example, in Canada, we have a large funding body called the Canadian Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, which will fund international collaboration. And we have a lot of faculty within Canada who have international interests who might be willing to partner in supporting more local research efforts. One can explore different international organizations such as UNESCO, the World Bank, or CARICOM. Again, this isn't an area that I have investigated at length, but I think there's opportunities for us to think about how we can approach some of these larger global institutions to see how we can achieve secure funds to support our research. Private foundations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Walmart Foundation, and MasterCard Foundation do have an interest in supporting international educational research. I'm currently involved in a project with Walmart, international project with the Walmart Foundation around Black food insecurity currently. And I know that the foundation is quite interested in promoting global collaboration. And the MasterCard Foundation as well, I know, has funded quite a bit of international work around education, including in Ghana. And then finally, I think there's also an opportunity to integrate research with our teaching and mentoring of students, right, and within the programming. So not all research necessarily requires a lot of financial resources to do. There is an opportunity for us, especially for teaching students to be critical thinkers, to develop skills of inquiry and systematic observation. We can actually embed research within our classrooms, right, and engage our students in processes of asking questions, collecting data, coming to some conclusions, and even implementing and generating some interventions. And so with that, I will close and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hesford. You have provided much food for thought on the topic, the importance of research in higher education. Once again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Can I just apologize? I'm sorry, I did not see the messages in the chat. I did not realize I was so far over. My sincere apologies. I'm so sorry.
Okay, thank you. Our next presenter is Dr. Stephen Johnson, who will present on the topic quantitative research methods, data collection, and analysis. Dr. Johnson is an accomplished researcher with extensive experience in research methods and monitoring and evaluation methodologies. With a vast portfolio of projects and research publications focused on confronting developmental issues in Jamaica, the wider Caribbean, and the developing world, Dr. Johnson is committed to taking a pragmatic approach to development challenges. His expertise lies in advanced research methods, monitoring and evaluation, voting behavior, user experience analysis, predictive analytics, harm reduction, and behavior modification campaigns. The British Commonwealth Scholar holds a PhD in International Development from the University of Sussex, UK. He also obtained an MSc in Government and a BSc in International Relations from the University of the West Indies, Jamaica. Dr. Johnson currently holds the position of Research Fellow, where he delivers lectures on research methods and equips graduate students with the necessary skills to conduct rigorous research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Johnson. Over to you, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm just going to jump right into it. My topic today is quantitative research, what, why, and how. So basically, we're going to explain what is it that we're doing, why we're doing it, and how do we go about doing it. To demonstrate the key three principles of quantitative research. What are we researching? Why are we researching it? How are we researching it? Now, what are you doing when you're doing a research topic? Now, this usually starts with your topic. You're answering the what question in terms of what is your topic. Now, research topics usually come from a cultural problem, a personal experience, out of curiosity, a piece of literature, or a request for proposal if you're an applied researcher. And in terms of selecting a research topic, usually we start broad,
Dr. Johnson, sorry to pause you. Is it possible for you to put up the full screen so we don't see what is coming next for the next slide? Swap the display feature. Click
Sorry.
swap this.
I'm not sure I understand.
It's at the top. At the top of your screen where you see swap display, beside tips.
Top right-hand corner. Oh, swap displays.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You still seeing it?
Yes, I'm still seeing it.
I think it's use slideshow. Click on use slideshow, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
Now we're seeing you. So go back to share here.
Go back to share it. All right.
Yeah.
Go back to share. All
What
right.
happened is he's using two screens, one in front of him and one at the side.
Yes, I am.
So if you swap the displays, it should.
I will just use
Right.
this.
That's it. That's it.
Great.
All right. We're good to go, right?
Sir, yes, sir.
All right. So we normally narrow our research topic, either by geographical region, in terms of what issues are most common in the Caribbean, or let's say by culture, how has Jamaican culture been affected by globalization, by time frame, which is most common. I'm sorry, hello? Which is by time frame. in terms of what are the most, like, for example, what are the most prominent public sector management issues over the last 10 years? So we normally use time, geographical location to narrow the scope of our research to make sure that it is not too wide. Now, in terms of outlining our research, we usually start with chapter 1, which covers the what and to an extent the why, in terms of providing a context, research statement, significance of the study, etc. Now, we're going to use a working example today because I like to teach while demonstrating. So we're looking at the relationship between age, geographical location, income, level of education, and vote in the Caribbean. Now, in looking to write the first chapter, I normally teach my students to take what I call the lampshade approach. So we start narrowing, introducing the problem, then we go wider in terms of how it is managed internationally or maybe regionally. And then we come back in with the thesis statement and then our research question to focus on what is it that we're doing, right? Sorry, just give me a second, please. Sorry. Right, so we normally start narrow, then we go wide and we go narrow and to demonstrate. So here we have an example of our background. And we talk about the Commonwealth Caribbean, giving some background. It's recognized for having political competition for its democracy. However, we notice a trend. So we're starting to introduce what is it that we want to study. So the trend that we're introducing, we notice, for example, between X number of years, the percentage of voter turnout fell from 45% to 35% within a particular period. And of course, we're alerting our audience that this is, of course, raises serious concern. Now, in terms of context, we have to provide some evidence of what was done before. So this is not maybe the first project or first piece of research that is out there. So we would have to pull on some sources or some pieces of literature to show that there are research that is being done in the Caribbean, but we're being critical to say, okay, they're focusing only on certain topics like political corruption, clientelism. Not to say these are not important, they are. However, we notice that the dying or the low voter turnout is being ignored. So what we're having now is a paucity of research, or we don't have any information as to how to better understand the problem. So we nuance it and say, while these are important, they overlook voter turnout across multiple cycles. So we're subtly introduce what we're doing. So we're introducing the what. Now, we get more specific now by looking at the specific problem. So, in essence, what is the problem that we're looking at? We're noticing that there's a decreasing trend. And if we ignore this trend, there's a risk that the small minority will continue to elect the majorities. And that goes against the principle of democracy, meaning the majority rules. So we have the minority electing the majority, right? And of course, this can cause, this can destabilize democratic governance in the region. So, it's important that we understand the drivers behind this decline. So we present the problem as it is. And there must always be a statement, and I call this thesis statement. So after you provide a background of the problem, you give some context in terms of research that was done, and you state, okay, to what extent they address the problem that you are about to highlight. So if there are gaps, you put the gaps in context, say, okay, there are research out there, but they're not addressing this, or even if they're addressing this, the policies or principles that are put forward, they're not applicable to our region or to the specific countries that you're looking at. You have to have a criticism to identify a gap, and the gap becomes the what, right? In looking at the problem statement, now we explain explicitly what the problem is, so somebody don't have to guess what is it that you're trying to investigate. And then we round it off by saying, by presenting our thesis statement, and this is usually the, now a statement that says, okay, I've provided you with the background, I provided you with the context, I've been critical, I provided you with the problem statement. This research, therefore, it's going to investigate, it's going to examine, it's going to explore. So what is it that you are going to do about the problem? So we continue to use the what, right? So you tell us what the background is, what the context is, what the problem is, and now you're supposed to tell us what you are going to do about the problem, as we have demonstrated here. So our thesis statement explains what is it that we're going to do. So this research will investigate underlying causes of declining voter turnout. So now we are connecting our problem statement to our research topic. Next, we try to address the why, and we also do that in chapter 1. Why is this research worth doing? And this is usually covered in your significance or your rationale. Now, in doing this piece of research, we can get a sense of where the gaps are with voter participation in terms of which demography, which geographical region, which age group, etc. And then we know how to design a behavior campaign and who to target, and be very precise in using evidence to make sure we're targeting the gaps, right? And not taking a one-size-fits-all approach. So in doing this research, we hope to ensure higher voter participation, raise awareness, identify the factors that are driving voter behavior, and design campaigns around these to improve voter turnout, right? The findings will influence canvassing strategies. And if ever you find yourself doing a piece of research and you're struggling to write the rationale or to answer the why question, ask yourself this: what will happen if nothing is done about the problem that you have described? And if nothing is done, then we continue with the low voter turnout, with our democracy being compromised, etc., etc. And that will help you to easier answer the why. And of course, we have an example here, the significance. This study will provide valuable insights, etc., etc. Now we come down now to our research question. In terms of round it off with given that it is quantitative, we have a question and our hypothesis. What is the relationship between income level and voting patterns? We develop our hypothesis alternative. There's a relationship between income levels, which is independent, and voting patterns, which is dependent. No, there's no relationship. All right, so we have our research questions and our hypothesis for each variable. We have it for income earlier, now it's for location and voting. In quantitative research also, we also have to conceptualize what we're talking about and operationalize. Now here we're defining age as the number of years of a person's. We could say their person's age on their last birthday or the age group to which they belong, right? So you as a researcher, you must have a reason why why you're conceptualizing that way. So because age can mean a lot of things. Age on your last birthday is continuous. What is your age? And you write a whole number. Or you might want to look at different age groups. You might want to look at Gen Z versus millennials versus Gen X versus boomers. I think I'm leaving out a particular age group. Income we mean by a monthly salary, or it could mean by an annual salary. So we are conceptualizing. Location, we mean where in the country you live in terms of geographic designation. Is it rural, urban, rural, suburban? Education, number of years of schooling. Voting, what we mean by persons who are 18 and over participating or exercising their franchise in a national or general election. Now, operationalization now is a little bit more specific. How are we going to measure? And I'm going to go into greater details under the how. Our units of analysis and observation, but mainly the units of analysis, we have to be able to identify that in our research. And the simple way of doing that when we're doing quantitative research is, who are we going to collect the information from? That's our unit of analysis. So we have to know who our unit of analysis are, and that comes under the what, right? Or where are we going to get the information? And those are persons who are 18 and over, in this case, who did not vote in the last election. Now, in continuing to round up the what, we have to use a framework, analytical framework, and in quantitative research is predominantly a theoretical framework. So we have to find a theory that we can use to explain voting behavior. And this will help us to interpret our findings when we go out in the field, as well as to help us to develop the questionnaires, right? So the purpose of review our analytical framework, what is to build the foundation on which we're going to have some information to do some interpretation, to assess the research design and instrument, and to provide a reference point for interpretation and to conceptualize the study, or to demonstrate how a study advances knowledge. Now, without a theoretical framework in quantitative research, we'll be all over the place. So it's like a body without skeleton. And as you can see, the left figure It's structured, it has a head, it has arms, it has legs, and it's standing. Without the skeleton or the structure, you just let it go, and it's flaccid, and wherever it rolls, it falls and takes shape. That's your research all over the place if you don't have a theoretical framework, i.e. analytical lens, right? It gives you structure. Within this study, this example that I'm using about what are the factors driving voting behavior, we're using this theory called rational choice theory. And we're basically reasoning that human beings are rational actors. Therefore, you have to stimulate them through providing policies or strategies or incentives to vote. Immediately, this is relatable to the what you are doing, in the sense that it will help you to understand how human beings behave. And already it's providing a framework to say, they're rational actors. You have to motivate them or incentivize them to vote based on your policies, your incentives, or whatever strategies. Just explain the relevance to my proposal, right? So we're saying voter turnout are driven by these factors, right? Because, for example, using age, younger persons are less likely to vote because certain things don't affect them. But unless you talk about employment policies, or some sort of technology, they're not going to be non-responsive. Older persons are more likely to vote when you talk about things like tax breaks, housing policies, mortgage rates. These are the things that incentivize these persons. Talking about infrastructural development in and around their area, having road network. Once these are presented in place, then as a rational human being, they are more likely to vote. If not, you're more likely to withhold your vote. As a religious person, you might look out for a party stance on abortion. Woman, as a female, you might look out for equality, equal pay, etc. Rural persons, urban development versus rural development. Income, whether or not I'm going to get a tax write-off, or what's the tax threshold, right? So,
Dr. Johnson, click dismiss of your reminders on your next device.
Yeah, dismiss all, yes. Right, thank you. Everything is being revealed this morning. Right. So the theoretical framework, it also shows how different variables are connected, the relationship between X and Y, right? And it helps us to clarify our research questions. Now to the big one, answering the how, and this is where we start to lose persons in quantitative research. Persons are comfortable writing an introduction, coming up with a research question, identifying hypotheses and structuring it, as well as identifying an analytical framework or a theory that they can use. But this is now when persons start to shy away from quantitative research in addressing the how. How are we going to carry out the research? How are we going to measure what we are researching, right? And just bear with me here. This is where we lose people. Now, I'm going to describe the approach that you're using, which is quantitative, of course, a research strategy and justification. I give an example here. This is a quantitative cross-sectional study. It's a descriptive research design. This type of research was selected because of the objective of the research is to explain the relationship between the independent variables and the dependent variables. Now, how are we going to measure or operationalize the variables? Because we deal with variables in quantitative research, right? So these are the variables. Now, before we talk anything about measurement, we have to understand the rules of measurement. And the rules of measurement has to do with levels of measurement. And there are 4 key levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. And I'm going to explain each one and use examples. Now, and I'm going to show you why it's important to understand these. When you understand levels of measurement, you know what test to run in quantitative research, whatever bivariate test to run. When you understand levels of measurement, you understand how to visualize your data. You also understand how to run measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. So the rule is, you also understand how to design a data collection instrument, i.e. a questionnaire. So we have to understand these. So the first one is, and the basic one is nominal variable. It means to name. You simply put things into categories and you label them. You classify things, right? Now there are 2 rules. Usually when you're having categories for a variable, it's exhaustive and it's mutually exclusive, meaning it's exhaustive. You have sufficient categories to capture the variable, and it's mutually exclusive. If you're in one category, you can't be in the other category. So for example, I have a nominal variable here and I ask you, what is your political party affiliation? right? And we have Labour Party, Conservative Party, Green Party, Independent. If you're in Labour Party, you can't be in Green Party. And that satisfies the mutually exclusive rule. And given the context in which it is asked, we try to capture every party that is there. So it is exhaustive. So when you're describing things, so this variable is nominal, right? You're merely putting things into categories. Next, we have ordinal variable. Now, you still classify things and you put them into categories and you label them, but the difference is that these labels, they can be logically ordered, right? You might not be able to minus or subtract, but they can become in some order. Like when somebody asks you, to what extent do you agree with something? Strongly agree, neutral, strongly disagree, strongly disagree, right? The person who strongly agrees more than the person who strongly disagrees, but you can't say by how much, right? So that's logically ordering, and that's an ordinal variable, right? For example, ordered category is very satisfied, unsatisfied, neutral, satisfied, very dissatisfied. You would have heard those before. Those are variables that are ordinally measured, right? Interval now, you have equal units between, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's essentially a quantitative measure. It facilitates differentiation, subtraction, classification, right? Ordering of subject. However, the difference here is that 0 has a meaning. For example, temperature is 0 degrees Celsius, meaning it's very cold. So when you're talking about interval ratio variables, the interval variable, when you say 0, 0 means that there's no temperature. It doesn't mean that there's no temperature. It means that it is very cold, right? For ratio, there's a true 0 point. So if a car is going 0 kilometers per hour, it's not moving. If I ask you what is your income and you say $0, it means that you don't have an income. All right, number of votes cast here in the example, 0 meaning that no vote was cast. All right. So it have all other features of the other levels of measurement. It can be multiplied, it can be divided, and 0 means absolutely nothing in this level of measurement. Right. So now that we're clear. Now, something else we need to establish is the type of data that these type of levels of measurement attract. So for nominal and ordinal, they attract discrete data. Example, male, female, your categorical data, while continuous data for interval ratio is used with true numbers. So if it says 0 income, it means 0 income. If you get 100,000 a month, you can punch in 100,000. 100,000 means you're not putting labels or anything. It's raw numbers that you're using, right? As you can see, so these are the features. Now, nominal variable, you merely classify or put things into categories. It uses discrete data, right? You code 1 for male, 2 for female. Ordinal, classification, categories, logical ordering. And interval ratio, you classify your order and it has equal intervals, but it uses continuous data. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to infinity. All right. So now let us get an understanding. Now that we have grasped, and I hope you'd have grasped the level of measurement, how does it influence the type of analysis that we do, right? Now, once we have an understanding of our level of measurement of the variables that we're using in the study, whether they're nominal, ordinal, and interval and ratio, then that will position us to answer the test that we can use. And again, this is the part that scares off a lot of persons. So if we have an independent variable and we use all of the rules and we classify it as nominal, and we have a dependent variable and we also use all of the rules and we determine the variable to be nominal, we can safely say if we're going to run a hypothesis including these two variables, then we can use a chi-stick square, phi coefficient, or contingency coefficient. And it's okay if you're at a position now where you can't run these in a statistical software. I guess you have persons who run these for you. But the most important thing is here, you'll be comfortably enough to be able to identify which type of test you should be using, right? Right? Are we here? Or I lost everyone?
No, sir, we're
No,
here with
we're
you.
following.
Right. So this is why it's important to have, understand the level of measurement. And I've provided the level of measurement for all my variables that I'm using. Right? Now, I've also created a matrix that I usually give my students where they put in the research questions. They have each hypothesis for the research question. and they write out what is the independent variable, the level of measurement that the independent variable is measured at, and then they're supposed to write out the question or questions that captures this particular variable on the instrument, right? So they will do that for the independent, they will do that for the dependent, and then when they look at how both of them are aligned, then they do their test, right? So what does this do? Well, when you know your level of measurement, when you can break down your hypothesis, you know which question captures it and the level of measurement for it, you're able to know the test, as well as you can use this to develop the questionnaire. Normally, when students come to you and ask them, how do you develop a questionnaire? They say, well, sir, some people tell me that you shouldn't go more than 5 pages, you shouldn't have more than 10 questions, it shouldn't be too long. No, none of the above is correct. The question should capture all the variables that you seek to use in your research, right? So it's not about the 5-page, 10-page, it's about looking at all the variables, all your independent variables, all your dependent variables, and writing out the question for each and making sure that it is on the instrument, and then you're safe. That's it. And this gives you a sense of you already know the type of test you want to use. Some persons, they will say they want to use regression, and then maybe they go out there and they collect age, for example, or income as a categorical variable, and then they struggle later on when they come in because they can't convert it to a continuous variable. So when you sit down and you design your study like this and understanding how you're going to do the how, it helps you to prevent you from making certain mistakes, and you're precise when you go out in the field, right? So you would know beforehand the type of test you want to use, the level at which you're measuring your variable, and how you want to ask it on the questionnaire. So that determines whether or not the question is going to be categorical or whether or not it's going to be open, and I ask you, how old are you? What was your age of your last birthday? Versus to which age group do you belong? Because once I have those categories and I come back in, I can't change it. But if I ask you what was your age in your last birthday, and I change my mind later, and I can always develop categories from that variable, right? So to demonstrate, so what is the relationship between location and voting? That would be the research question. The hypothesis is there's no relationship between a person's location and how they vote, right? The independent variable here is geographical location, and it's nominal, right? It's nominal because it's a categorical variable. It's basically asking persons which category they fall in, whether rural, urban, or suburban, right? Discrete data. Then the question that will go on the questionnaire to capture this independent variable is, which geographical location do you live? And they will tell you. So you put that on the questionnaire, right? Then the dependent variable is voted in the last election. Did you vote in the last election? Yes, no. This is also a nominal variable, right? And this question should be on the questionnaire called, did you vote in the last election? So we know that these two questions are on the questionnaire, right? And if this is the only thing we're looking at in our study, then the questionnaire ends right there. So it's not about the number of pages or the number of questions. It's asking what we're supposed to ask, making sure the questions that we're exploring are there. Then when we have our independent variable and we have our dependent variable and we have the level of measurement for each, then we can select our test called the chi-square. And we know that we're going to run that later on, right? We're not guessing because nominal independent variable, nominal dependent variable, you do a chi-square. If it was ordinal, we do this. If it was nominal, ordinal, etc., our interval ratio, we have different tests that we can use, right? So this is why it's important to understand your level of measurement. This is the golden rule. And it comes with practice, and your confidence is built over time. And here we have a full example of different hypotheses for a study. What is the relationship between gender and exercising frequency? Gender is as a nominal variable, exercise frequency, ratio variable. We look at what is your gender nominal? How is the dependent variable operationalized? How many times per week do you exercise? Which is ratio, because you're supposed to put in the number of times. We can do that chi-square or independent t-test. Does your income level predict exercise frequency? That's the hypothesis. That's the research question, and the independent should be independent variable is survey question. What is your household income? Right, we're using range and we're measuring it at the ordinal level. And how many times per week do you exercise? Again, this is ratio. We can use a Spearman rank order correlation or ANOVA. So you kind of get the sense of how we would set this up, how we would do the how. Once you know your research questions, once you know your hypothesis, once you know your independent, dependent variable, the level at which they are measured, the level of measurement with the nominal, ordinal, interval ratio, then we can select the type of data analysis that we're going to run. So in a sense, when you're doing this, you have to link your topic to your theoretical framework. Your theoretical framework is linked to your hypothesis. Hypothesis is linked to operationalization. Data collection is linked to data analysis. And all of this is driven by the how, the why, and the what. But the key thing, or the key cog that is driving all of this, is understanding the level of measurement. I can stop here, but I think I might have a little time. I'm just asking for a minute. It also affects the type of analysis that you run in terms of univariate analysis, measures of central tendency, right? So, and also how you visualize. So when you have the mode, which is the most frequent category, it goes with all levels of measurement. And I would teach my students, when you have the median, which is the middlemost number, you can't use it with a nominal. Some say you can use it with ordinal, but it goes with interval and ratio. The mean is very mean. It only works with interval and ratio variables. You can only find the mean of age or the mean of income, but you can't find the mean gender, etc., right? So just to demonstrate, you use pie chart, normally with nominal and ordinal variables, and bar graph, histogram with interval ratio. So even your level of measurement influences how you visualize your data, right? And that's it in a nutshell. Any questions? Or we go to a break now. Colleagues? Oh, there's a hand up.
Yes, Ms. Williams, go ahead.
Excellent presentation, Dr. Johnson, very informative. I have a question, however, with regards to the test, the parametric and the non-parametric. I understand the relationship between knowing the variables and the type of statistical test you want to run. I may have missed it. Did you make mention of the assumptions that we need to consider before we decide if it's going to be parametric or non-parametric? Are there some set assumptions that we must meet before we can decide on which of these that we will?
Yes, in terms of whether or not the data is normally distributed, but I wouldn't want to get into the technicality when I'm teaching the foundations of it. So now you have to use a parametric test, you have to test for normal distribution to make sure that you don't have homoscedasticity, etc. But I am trying to win souls on board, not to scare them away. So yes, but the fundamental in selecting your tests, your bivariate tests or multivariate tests, is understanding the level of measurement. So we have to start there.
Thank you so much. But will it be possible for you to share this information with us?
What, the respective slides?
The assumptions to go along with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, all right.
All right, if no more questions, we want to say thanks very much to Dr. Johnson for his very informative presentation. And I must say a very good presentation and a good teacher in that he used real life, something that we can relate to in order to bring the presentation. So thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. We'll take 5 minutes break. Until 10:25, we resume, so you can stretch or take a walk. Ms. McFarlane, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Griffiths. Our next presenter is Dr. Khadija Williams, Research Officer and Senior Lecturer at the Monique College and Honorary Consultant at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, UWI-MONA. She is an applied social scientist who lectures research courses in social work, psychology, education, and hospitality and tourism. She focuses on bridging scholarship and practice and stimulating students to take an evidence-informed approach to decision-making. Her research interests include Caribbean migration, crime and violence prevention among youth, safeguarding children and youth, gender-based violence, rural development, and child and youth justice. She has over 30 years of local, regional, and international experience as a practitioner and educator. Dr. Williams' published work includes Social Agriculture and Rural Youth in COVID-19, Caribbean Migration, Residential Child Care Social Work, Ethics and Values, Innovative Community Practice, Women in Agriculture, Gender-Based Violence and COVID-19 Vaccine Acceptance and Uptake in the Caribbean. Championing the philosophy, she has also written articles for top media houses in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago as a guest columnist on topical issues related to her field of work. She works with tireless ambition to support Caribbean development and integration, seeing these as vehicles for regional and global advancement for a more sustainable future. Help me welcome Dr. Khadija Williams.
And thank you very much for your introduction. And I'll get straight into it in the interest of time. I'm going to share a video. I'm going to start with that. And good morning to all participants. Thanks for coming to join us.
Is human-centered design, and why does it matter? Also known as design thinking and user-centered design, human-centered design puts people at the core of its products and programs. It's about designing with, and not just for the end user, aiming to truly meet the needs of the beneficiary, customer, or client. Just another buzzword? Let's break down exactly what human-centered design is and why it matters for the global development community. Human-centered design has its origins in the private sector, in fields like user interface design and human-computer interaction. While the development community has long recognized the need for more participatory approaches, the sector still receives criticism for designing for problems instead of designing for people. But what does it mean to design for people? Before creating a solution, development professionals must thoroughly understand the problem by engaging with communities and individuals, spending time with them, listening to their concerns, and understanding the specifics of their lives. This process involves the rigorous collection of qualitative data, which is turned into deep insights about a target audience and then is used to design a set of workable, personalized, data-driven solutions for each specific community or country. This means it's inherently built from what works in a given context, instead of trying to adapt an existing solution to fit unique circumstances. The next stage of human-centered design is prototyping. Prototyping is about getting ideas into the community to get active participation. Organizations can create a rough prototype that is introduced into the community for feedback and further refined into a pilot. This may seem like a lot of work before you begin to implement a solution. What makes it worth it? Development practitioners are already harnessing this approach at international organizations like UNICEF, philanthropic ventures like the Gates Foundation, and private sector development companies like Chemonics. Here are some benefits that they have shared. 1. It checks assumptions. Human-centered design helps organizations develop and build on new and ambitious ideas, rather than dismissing them out of hand before they have a chance to prove their worth. 2. It helps us cut waste. Human-centered design is a process that, if executed well, can drastically change the way we use and spend resources. 3, it helps us forge new partnerships. Human-centered design brings together different types of thinkers and makers, people who bring different disciplinary perspectives, cultural understandings, and creative abilities. Above all, it pushes us to get into a project with questions rather than catch-all solutions. As human-centered design becomes more commonplace in global development, here are a couple things to remember as you apply it to your work. First, have a solid grasp of what human-centered design is before deciding that it's the right methodology for you. Do your research and look thoughtfully within your organization or project to understand if and how human-centered design could add value. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Rather, there may be elements of human-centered design that can complement and support what you're already doing, and other elements that are less relevant or too resource-intensive. Human-centered design is new to our community. Applying the method takes a shift in mindset. Be open, give it a try, and let us know how it works for you. Are you using
So thank you. So that's the introduction video to my presentation on qualitative methodology. And let's give me a minute. We can't talk about qualitative research in Jamaica and in the educational landscape without trying to understand the historical context. And as we know, Jamaica was colonized by the Spanish in the late 15th century and the later part of the mid 17th century, right? So during the colonial era, which lasted until 1962, education, as we know, was primarily reserved for the white colonial elite and very few free blacks. So enslaved Africans were largely denied formal education as literacy was viewed as a potential threat to the oppression and oppressive system of slavery. And it's important for us to locate qualitative research there because it is a very transformative approach to gathering data and to reaching solutions to social problems, okay, and complements the quantitative approach quite nicely. I want to just give you an overview of my presentation. As I started off by talking about the colonial foundations, and then I'd look at qualitative research as an anti-colonial pedagogy. As you heard in that video presentation, these human-centered approaches are quite new to our spaces because traditionally we've been a very quantitative research-centered society. And we're now understanding that through qualitative research, it could help to liberate us, to help us, as you heard Dr. Hasford talk about today as well, about understanding the oppressed and bringing marginalized voices to the table. I would be able to stimulate some qualitative research thinking, as well as give you some very practical applications of how it can be done. Look at non-traditional qualitative research, really exciting ways. And we're working with young people who are now using the technologies. They like to be on TikTok, social media, taking pictures, and qualitative research allows for us to explore these areas in a very, as Dr. Johnson would have said earlier, very systematic ways. That is why it's so important for us to also embrace the traditions of the quantitative, because it speaks to systematizing, it speaks to us verifying and so on, so that we have validity in what we're doing and we just don't make decisions or conduct research from an emotional basis. So I'll also share some qualitative data analysis information and talk a bit about conducting ethical research and share with you some online qualitative data analysis sources. So in the chat, if just to get your fingers a bit busy, what comes to mind when you think of qualitative research? Just take a minute and put it in the chat. What comes to mind when you think of qualitative research? We're interested to hear how you think about it. Mods, are we getting feedback in the chat? People, right? So you can just tell me put one word, put a sentence, what comes to mind when you hear qualitative research. So we see something coming in, exploration of depth of information, understanding the why. Yes, analyzing human behaviors. Yeah, descriptive content. Yeah, keep it coming. Very good. So yeah, so qualitative. So we're going to learn some more about it. And one more came, thinking rich. Yes, so rich descriptions. Yes, we talk about being rich and thick in our descriptiveness. It's opposite. So someone says it's opposite of quantitative research. And we would say not quite opposite, because as you heard Dr. Johnson speak a bit earlier, we still need that robustness, the rigor, the systematic approach, the procedures, the literature review to help substantiate our findings and locate our research and so on. Okay, so I like to say it complements rather than being too opposite. Because we love our quantitative researchers because they help us to know where to look so that we can get more of the why. Yeah, so thank you for that. So moving along, qualitative research, very important, is that it is an anti-colonial pedagogy, as that it is not just about collecting data, it's about challenging dominant narratives and empowering marginalized voices and fostering social justice. The purpose of qualitative research is not to prove, but to understand, right? So we want to know more of the why is this happening? Why? We want to get deeper into the rich descriptions, okay? So when we're speaking about qualitative research, you know, sometimes I ask students, I said they want to conduct a study, design a study, and they would say, Miss, I want to do qualitative research, you know, it's easy. It is easier. And then I know that something is missing, because deep within the tradition of qualitative research is philosophy. We must understand, for instance, interpretivism and constructivism. We must be able to understand the subjective meanings of social phenomena and emphasize the context in which people exist. Okay? And then within the constructivist approach, we need to understand the philosophical and educational theory that posits that individuals construct their own understanding. So as we live, we create our own understandings. We're very unpredictable human beings. So we talk about constructing and reconstructing and deconstructing our realities. And you know, we are seeing that when we look at COVID and so many things right now in education, we are now reconstructing. We're having a webinar today online. A few years ago, that was not constructed. So we cannot overlook the importance of interpretivism and constructivism. And when we look at it in the classroom, we look at constructivism as engaging students in active learning, understanding their social context, understanding the personal relevance, the assessment. Assessments can be constructivist in the sense that instead of the traditional approaches to assessments, let's do a multiple choice question, or let's just do an essay, let's give the students a 2-hour test. We now have assessments that would include, for instance, digital portfolios. Yeah, we will have assessments that would allow students to take pictures and show evidence of their work. We allow students to engage in participatory work. Yeah, go out into the community, engage and collect data and so on. So the role of the teacher under constructivism has changed. We are no longer the repository of all information, but we believe when we take a constructivist approach that The classroom is everywhere. It's everywhere around us. Okay, so we become facilitators in the process. So no longer that top-down approach, right? So knowledge construction is critical. So 3 concepts we need to understand further when we talk about philosophy and qualitative research. And you may have heard the term epistemology. And epistemology, a big word, but what it really means is the nature of knowledge. It helps us to understand that knowledge is constructed through interactions and experiences, as I said before, that constructivist approach, the constructivism, it is subjective, where our experiences are shaped by the context in which we exist. So the questions we ask when we're looking at epistemology would be, how do we know what we know? How does context affect our understanding? And in deconstructing our knowledge base and looking at an anti-colonial context, we will all here as educators, we know earlier times, most of the work we read were coming from Europe, from North America, and so on. And we start asking ourselves in the 21st century now with more enlightenment, more empowerment, is this really our reality? Yeah. So not discarding our forefathers of theories and all the beautiful work that was done, but to help us to look more inward and try to understand what really is our reality. What is it? How do we know what we know? Ontology, right? It's the subjective versus the objective experience. And how do qualitative researchers view the world? So that's the other, construct. Yeah, it's the nature of reality. We must believe that different people, based on their time, the context, they see the world differently. There is no objective truth, but there is a collection of perspectives. So the questions we ask, the ontological questions would be, what is the nature of existence? And how do individuals construct their reality? Then we look at the third philosophical thought of axiology. And axiology, as a qualitative researcher, we must be able to say, yes, I'm a human being conducting research. I have my own personal values and beliefs, and they will come into the research. So having that awareness, that understanding, we would then know that we need to pay attention to our value-laden and subjective notions that could influence the outcomes of research. Okay, so axiology is very critical, understanding the role of values in research. So the key axiological questions would be, what values are embedded in the research process? How do these values affect the research? And these values are determined based on our culture, our experiences growing up, the kind of education we got, what class, what social class we belong to, and so on. So understanding the axiology helps us to locate our values in research. So again, it's epistemology, ontology, and axiology. We must understand those 3 when we're conducting the qualitative research. Sometimes it's overlooked, and I often ask sometimes, people conducting research, if they can't explain to me those 3 areas, I say we need to go back to the drawing board, okay? So qualitative research involves non-numerical data. As we saw earlier, data is typically descriptive and narrative, so the person who said that, great. We collect through interviews and focus groups, observations, open-ended surveys, because we're explorative. We want to find out, we want to learn about people's experiences, their views of reality, okay? So it aims to explore and understand underlying meanings, concepts, experiences, and again, to answer the questions of how and why something happens. What's the depth and the context of the experience? It's very flexible and emergent, meaning that You can begin. I remember when I was doing my PhD study, I started off looking at one particular area. I did an ethnography over a period of about 4 to 5 years, and observing children in children's homes in a Caribbean island. And I went in with my own research proposal and ideas of what I think I needed to look at, but the children showed me, no, miss, that's not what you need to be looking at. So out of my work, I found a wealth of information, things that as researchers, we could have been overlooking as experiences for these children. So I've written extensively on those. So emergent, that's what we mean when we say qualitative research is flexible, it's emergent, it's exciting work, I think. Okay? Focusing on context, meaning, and interpretation. Now, continuing with the analysis. Analysis in qualitative research usually involves themes. What are those common themes, patterns, and insights from the data? And beautifully, as I would speak about after, we now have quite a bit of qualitative data analysis software that helps us to pull themes together. I remember over like 15 years ago when first doing my qualitative research, we had to sit down at the university on huge tables with flip charts upon flip charts, cutting and pasting and trying to see where the patterns and the themes. So now we have digital software that is doing much of that for us, which gives us more time to really get to the meat of the analysis and link the literature review, the theoretical framework to the brain work. Okay, so some of the methods include coding and thematic analysis, as well as narrative analysis. So it produces rich, detailed descriptions that provide insights into participants' perspectives and experiences. And findings are often more subjective and context-specific than the quantitative tradition. Now, but with that being said, I'm going to share with you how we can reduce some of this subjectivity so we get more of that robustness and neutral findings and, you know, get a more balanced perspective. I'll talk a bit later on that. So examples of a qualitative study might be exploring the experiences of cancer survivors through in-depth interviews and studying classroom dynamics through participant observation. So I'm going to explore here briefly some non-traditional qualitative research methods. And we have, for example, I mentioned I did a 4 to 5 year ethnography examining children in care. And that's literally where you immerse yourself in a culture, you live among people, you experience every significant event with them over a period of time. It's a cultural experience that you're trying to understand why people do what they do. I've also done ethnographies right here in Jamaica among youth in education. There are several ways in which we can conduct ethnographic studies.
List for the class?
Go ahead.
No, when I download the grade sheet.
Oh, no, okay, sorry. Somebody needs to mute. Okay, yeah, so as we said, remember, all of us were multitasking. We are all educators. Well, most of us on the platform, so sometimes people forget their mics on. So, so the example of an ethnographic study would be remote, you know, studying a remote indigenous community where the researcher lives with the community for several months to observe cultural practices, their rituals, how they interact with each other. The researcher will document the life of people, their beliefs, the community dynamics, etc. Okay, and then we have action research, and we got an example. I don't need to go into this. Dr. Hasford gave a brilliant example of one that he did, what he did at the University of Toronto, okay? So it's basically you're collecting data while you are making a change to a service or you're trying to improve some condition and so on, and you are collaborating with the participants of your research. So this is actually a really good method for teachers in the classroom to improve teaching standards, teaching and learning behaviors, and so on, to see what works. We then have discourse analysis, and this primarily focuses on how we make sense of written work, spoken, visual communication, all right? And an example would be analyzing political speeches to uncover what are the underlying ideologies. So you may get the speeches of three presidents or 3 prime ministers to see, you know, you want to analyze what is it that they're really saying? What is that larger discourse? That is, what is that underlying philosophy that they are pushing? Okay. It could also be that you are looking at the language use, rhetorical strategies, and framing to understand how politicians shape public perception and discourse. Then we have another example, something I like to do quite often when I'm sitting in male-dominated meetings, to listen to the power dynamics at play, the kinds of words being used, you know, how the gendered ideologies come to the fore in very subtle ways, you know, very subtle ways. So, and it's something, an area for studying in the Caribbean. Quite have some interesting ideas on that if anybody's interested. Then we have visual ethnography. And this is basically, you're looking at photography and videos to document the lives of people in a particular culture. We have narrative inquiry into the life stories, for example, of veterans who would have fought in wars and they returned home after service. You conduct interviews, so you want to get their stories. Or let's say, for example, in the rural community where I am, where you capture the stories of senior farmers to hear what was their journey, you know, what was that life journey like? What were their coping strategies and so on? What do they foresee in the life of agriculture and so on? Okay, so participatory research is also there. Researchers collaborate with community members, and this too falls under sort of an action research tradition. Phenomenological research, again, it looks specifically at lived experiences of persons. And an example is here, for example, of people living with chronic illnesses. You may want to do a phenomenological study among female cancer patients. Yeah. So you want to explore how they understand and navigate their daily lives in the healthcare system or in their community and so on. And then we have grounded theory that looks specifically at, you know, as it suggests, it's a new area. You're trying to understand it from the bottom up. So an example here is the experiences of online gamers. We know young people now into the gaming. We may want to understand what is it that's capturing their interest? How is it affecting them? You know, we want to understand so that we can develop a theory that helps us to develop interventions and to influence gaming environments. Cultural studies, also mobile methods are also used, which again, with all the smartphones, a phone is an excellent research tool. Photo elicitation, which also, this is also photo elicitation, where you use photographs to capture stories, to tell stories of people who would have otherwise been marginalized and voiceless. So I did a project at one time with the hearing impaired students who were able to engage in research using photo elicitation. It's also called photo voice. Okay. So just to give you a quick one, because this is something I think if any of you have research classes, it's a good one. Students usually like it. the process of a photo elicitation. You select or create photos. First, you decide what is it that you want to study. Let's say you want to study flooding in your area after heavy rainfall. Students then take pictures, a lot of pictures of it. They conduct interviews with people who are being affected. Then they begin to analyze the data, the interviews, along with the photos that tell the story to get themes and to understand the meanings that people ascribe to the images. So sometimes what we do is we will take the photographs and then take it to another community and show it to the people and say, look at this photo, what comes to mind? You know, what comes to mind? And that then brings about a whole lot of discussions and stimulating thoughts about flooding in their communities and how they are affected. Okay, it encourages engagement, deep insight, and accessibility to people who usually are not as verbal, as I said, with my hearing impaired group that I worked with, and as well as children or individuals who are usually told to be silent. Children do very well with photo elicitation. You can just give them a disposable camera and tell them, take pictures. We'll be surprised to know what their world really is. Yeah. So there's some examples there. And of course, another non-traditional approach is oral history, which is linked to the narrative approach, where you get into the meanings of an experience with people who have really rich experiences in a culture over a period of time. So you capture their voices. So this is usually really good with intergenerational projects where you have students interview the elderly or students interview teachers to, get all the teachers. For example, at your school, you may want to find out who were the last 10 principals or 5, if any of them are alive, interview them to capture their oral history. So personal narratives, interviews, it helps to preserve the voices of people. All right. And I also have here the approach. You select your participants, you conduct the interviews, you transcribe the interviews, conduct the analysis to look for the narratives, for themes, patterns, significant insights, and then you present the findings to the persons who you interview to make sure that you indeed captured what they were sharing. Okay. And these are some others: historical, research, cultural. You all see how rich qualitative research can take you down an alley that you don't even want to return, and because it is so exciting. Yes. So I want to talk a bit more about analyzing qualitative research. And like Dr. Johnson said earlier, for quantitative research, this is sometimes where the students get lost and people are turned off, they panic. When it comes to the literature review and understanding how to make sense of the theory. Yeah, so very important to qualitative research is a rich body of literature that could help to contextualize the research, that can help you to theorize what you're looking at so that you can get a deeper understanding from a theoretical standpoint. Okay, so it must be organized. So maybe it's another seminar on conducting literature review, but this is a very systematic approach as well, if you're to do qualitative research well. Okay, and also remember, when analyzing qualitative data, it is important that we engage in member checking. Always go back to the people as much as you can, to ensure that they validate the findings. Understanding positionality and reducing researcher bias is also very important. Again, we are human beings conducting the research. It's not just a document that we're sending out for people to tick yes or no. We are now immersed in the research. So we must understand our positionality. Okay, we must understand it so that we can practice ethical research. So just to and also the researcher bias, so that we ensure that we do not engage in biased research. And we bring, you know, I always wanted to research this to prove a particular point. That's not the reason why we're doing this. And I hope with this presentation, I made it quite clear about why we do this kind of qualitative research. Is not to prove a point, but rather to get deeper insights into experiences. Okay, so I wanted to highlight here, just as educators, you know, quite a bit of our students have research projects, and it's important, especially at the lower levels, that we do not engage them in too much intrusive research, and particularly now with the Data Protection Act, and particularly with the Safeguarding Children and Young People through the Child Protection Act. It is very important that we take these considerations into account, that as much as possible. So what do we do, right? So what do we do? Let's try to use more secondary data. Let's try to use institutional research. Keep the research within your institution. Let's try to utilize retrospective accounts of people rather than engaging too many minors in sensitive research. Navigate the issues of consent and representation and the impacts of research on communities. It's very important that if we are sending, let's say, our fourth-year students out for research, it's important for us to give the community, the organization, some feedback on how the research they conducted could help them to improve, all right, in whichever area. So researchers should consider how their work can lead to sustainable changes within communities, and it's important to always address the power imbalances in research. Okay, so that, remember, it's not our agenda we're pursuing, but we want to get the voices of marginalized participants. So this was my key point on the researcher bias and positionality. We come from different gender, class, race, different age group, ethnicity. We have different experiences. We must be mindful researchers. We must be researchers that understand our positionality, so we avoid the researcher bias. Okay, we don't let our beliefs go back to the axiology. So we do not allow these beliefs, the personal beliefs and values and our personal experiences influence the research process to the extent that the research is invalid, unreliable, and you know, it just is not representative. So we need to be conscious researchers. So how we do this? Be reflexive. Critical self-reflection is important. The member checking I talked about. Get diverse perspectives. Don't just look at one. I know for students, sometimes the diverse perspective is a challenge. You have such a short period of time to conduct research. But you know what we can start doing? Conduct research or give assignments where this year, this group starts it, and the next year, another, or the next semester, another group continues another phase of it. So these are things we have to consider in our ethical research practices. And of course, the transparent reporting, as I shared, go back to the participants as much as you can, share your findings, member check. So by acknowledging and addressing positionality and researcher bias, qualitative researchers can enhance the credibility and validity of their work, ultimately leading to more meaningful and representative findings. And here I have a list of data analysis software that you can use as I close. Vivo, Atlas-TI, which is really good. I use Atlas-TI, it's excellent. It helps, especially if you're using, it's bulky data. It helps you to, it's really about the data management and helping you, as I said, not going back to when we spread out all the sheets of paper and with scissors and glue and tape, just sticking up themes and topics. But now the software is helping us, so we spend more time thinking and bringing the literature and understanding how to apply the theory to the research and so on. Then we have Max QDA and QDA Minor. Okay, So these are some references. So I want to thank you. You could take a snapshot. All that I've said came from all these people and from my own experiences as a researcher over the last 20 years or so. So thank you very much. I hope this was informative. And just remember that if you didn't catch it, much of it, or if you didn't get all of it, just remember that we're recording and be patient with yourself. So go back to the recording, stop, pause, take some notes, practice, and that would help. So over to you again, Mrs. McFarlane, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, it's over to you, Ms. Griffiths. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams.
All right, so at this time we'll do an activity. So we want to see how much you have learned from what it is that the presenters presented today. We wanted to do it in the form of a breakout room, but we are not able to do so. So you're going to do it individually, and then we'll take a few persons to do their presentation. What you will do is that you will identify an issue that you'd like to research. And then for that issue that you have identified that you'd like to investigate, you are going to tell us which of the method, whether qualitative or quantitative, that you would choose, and then tell us why. Which of them would give you the best result? So let me go again. You're going to identify an issue that you'd like to research. And then from that issue that you'd like to research, you're going to tell us which of the methodology would be best for you to use to do that research and why. So I'll give you a few minutes for persons to decide, and then I'll take some. And if anyone has any question for Dr. Williams, you can indicate and we'll take the question at this. A question for Dr. Williams. How do we minimize subjective analysis in data collection and management? Dr. Williams, a question for
Yes.
you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Okay, so what we subjective analysis, we go back to the theory, we go back to the literature review. Now we have the, let's say we're analyzing the data, we got, let's look, for example, at, let's say we're looking at youth violence in a particular area. And we found in our data collection that the young people are saying that they have a lot of idle time. You know, parents are busy working, they don't have much supervision. We then take that data, we go back to our literature review. What does the literature say about parental supervision and gang violence? And how do we measure it up to what the young people have said to us as we collected the data? Okay, what have we done? We have sort of eliminated our own views, because as a researcher, you may say, you know, that's true, because I really had a friend some years ago when I was a kid, and that his parents would never be home, and now he is at 100-man prison. Now, that's your positionality you're bringing into the picture, but the literature and the theories around youth violence and parental supervision is what we are going to rely on to help us to remain a bit more subjective. And specifically, we're looking at the data that we have pulled from our interviews, our observations of these young people who engage in crime and violence. So we're going to pull on that data, make sure it's representative, and then we utilize the theories and literature so that we can be very robust in our analysis. Okay? Hope that helps. And just to add to that, what I found very useful too is the proper use of the software. The qualitative data analysis software helps you to remain, you know, it helps. There's also it's qualitative. It also helps you to quantify the qualitative. So you can actually say like how many youth said parental supervision and so on. Okay.
All right, there's a next question, but this one is for Dr.
Dr.
I think he
there.
left. I'm not sure if you can address it, Dr. Williams. What's the best approach to influencing policy change in academic and political institutions from the outcome of research?
Right. So one of the first things I would suggest is to present the data, let the data speak to the policymakers. Secondly, which should have been first actually, is conduct the research. As I said earlier, you know, that this anti-colonial approach, I gave you the contextual information about Jamaican education system, what was its origins and so on. And now here we have the world is calling, some of the biggest and brightest and best universities are now calling for more qualitative research because they want to get into the action, the applied research, the action-oriented research that we even saw examples of how it's working at the Metropolitan University with Dr. Hasford, how he's able to go and change the curriculum based on data that he utilized, data he gathered from his students doing action research. So we need to firstly conduct the research. Secondly, present the data in ways that could be digestible to the policymakers and aligned to the SDGs, aligned to all the different macro policies so that there is relevance and there is urgency in taking action. And I am sure Dr. Hasford would concur. We are often in many debates about this. So I'm just speaking on this behalf. Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Williams, for your insightful presentation and for responding to the questions. Now participants will address the activity that was assigned to you earlier. So participants, you can indicate by raising your hand if you wish to answer. So we ask for you to identify a topic that you'd like to research, which research method you would use to research that topic and why you would choose that method. So we'll take responses at this. Anyone would like to respond?
Please check the chat, Diane.
Yeah.
All right, so Ms. Karian Carr is saying, to what extent can librarians repackage information to increase academic performance in young adults at the high school level? And a research method that she will use is mixed methods research. Ms. Carr, can you say why, explain some more why you choose this method for this stuff?
Okay,
Ms.
Ms.
McFarlane,
Griffith.
there are others coming in.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Carrie Ann Paulwell.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So the topic that I would like to research is an investigation into the impact of Airbnbs on the occupancy levels of hotels in Port Antonio within the last 5 years. And the research method would be the mixed method. Why? The quantitative method would provide data on occupancy levels, on rates charged, and also revenues generated, while qualitative method would provide insights into guest expectations, guest perceptions, and guest experiences that would perhaps influence their choices.
All right, great. So we realize sometimes we have to use both of them based on the data that we are gathering, so that we can use one to support the other. So thank you very much. All right, so going back to Ms. Karian Parr topic and her chosen method. Her reason for choosing the mixed method is that it would capture responses from perspectives in test scores and responses from interviews, observation, and checklists. All right, so very good. All right, so going to our next one, we have one coming in from Samantha McLean. She's saying that young persons tend to shy away from agriculture. How is it that we can use ICT for youth and youth entrepreneurship? She did not say which method she'll use and why. So Samantha, you can provide us with that. Thank you. And next one from Miss McFarlane, how prepared are today's student teachers for the 21st century classrooms? So which method would you use and why?
Okay, so I was thinking that I would conduct a mixed methods research in that I would administer questionnaires to in-service teachers with 1 to 2 years experience, because we want those who are fresh from college. And then I would also conduct interviews with principals of primary and secondary schools in which these persons are teaching. So we get the perspective of the principals or administrators and the perspective of the students.
All right, thank you very much for Samantha McLean. She said that she used the mixed methods approach, quantitative for surveys to gather initial data on youth's perception, follow up with qualitative for conducting interviews to delve deeper into findings, how we can attract them to the sector. All right, so thank you very much for that. Dr. Williams, going back to a question from one of the participants based on the presenter. I think Dr. Johnson left, so if you could answer it, how do we begin to introduce quantitative research at the secondary level, given the poor interest that students have in mathematics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for some areas it's already introduced. I know in, like, for example, social studies, school-based assessments and AIs and so on, the portfolios that have to be created for advanced studies. But I would say that we help young people all the time. It's about helping them to see the relevance, making research applied, make it relevant to whatever they are doing. So for example, if you're teaching agriculture students, help them to understand why is it important to know measurements. So take them into the field and help them to measure a hole. It's all applied research. My answer to that question is applied research. Make research relevant. Help them to understand applied mathematics. And then that brings some level of interest. And then we can move from there. Just to jump from ordinary math statistics with students, it's a big leap. So we, yes, certainly help them to see the relevance of why they need to know the maths, and then bring in the stats and the percentages and so on gradually. But I think it is already in the curriculum. When you look at the mathematics curriculum, even I look at my two children's grade 5 and 3 curriculum, they're doing some of it already. Statistics. They're doing statistics from grade 1 or grade 2. All right, so again, our role as researchers in the colleges and as educators throughout, in general, always help them to make the connection, see the relevance. That's my answer to that. And if anybody else has another point of view, I am also open to hear your views on that.
All right, everyone. I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this webinar today. And we are very much so more grateful to our participants, Dr. Ashford, Dr. Johnson, and Dr. Williams for taking time out of their schedule and for their informative presentations on the different sections that they presented on. Dr. Ashford, he brought to our understanding the importance of doing data collection in the higher education level. Why it is important for us to be continually doing research on a daily basis or carrying out action research so that we can add to the value of literature out there. And he showed us an example of at his institution that he's presently lecturing at to give us evidence-based approach to how we can carry out that research. Thank you also to Dr. Johnson. He went into a very real-life example showing how we can carry out quantitative research, the process of carrying out quantitative analysis in gathering that data. And he used the example of low voter turnout to go through that step by step to show us the different types of data that it will be collected using quantitative. He also showed us the different data analysis method that we should use in terms of collecting that data to analyze it. Dr. Williams, she went into the different types of qualitative data that there is, as well as how we can go about doing that data collection. In the end, when we do the summary, we also get from the participants the different topics. You give us examples of different topics that you could use to use a different method. But our key takeaway is that in the end, some persons may choose to go qualitative, others may do quantitative, or we can do a mixed method. And sometimes it's best to do mixed method in that we can use one to validate the other or to complement the other. So I want to thank you very much, and I hope that from today's webinar, there is a great takeaway from you and that you can put it in your practice in carrying out research, and not just carrying it out, but taking it to the pathway of publication so we can add to the literature that is out. At this time, we are going to post a post evaluation in the chat. So we're asking for you to complete it before you. Thank you very much again.
Colleagues, I see some people leaving, but just to appeal to you again, to do the post-evaluation, we need this data to see how effective this webinar was. Thanks again.
Can persons still participate in the survey if they're on another platform, for example, YouTube? Can we just share this to our colleagues so they can complete the survey?